Hey everyone, this is Pete, and one of my favourite things to have arisen in the modern gaming scene is the way that today's independent developers are willing to look back at gaming's past and give us new takes on styles of game that just aren't being made by the big corporations anymore. One such example is the mechanic-centric world RPG, best exemplified by the early entries in the classic Ultima series, in which a scripted storyline is eschewed in favour of emergent narrative, gameplay that doesn't hold your hand, and a sense of freeform progression and exploration. These haven't been a thing in the mainstream RPG space, either on consoles or home computers, for many years. But over the last few years, some independent creators have been giving us fresh takes on this type of game. A couple of years back, we had the excellent Moonring, put together by a former Lionhead developer as a completely free title to entertain people during the COVID years. Today, we have Cyclopean, the Great Abyss, a thoroughly fascinating offering that blends elements of Lovecraftian cosmic horror with the traditional world RPG format. Let's take a closer look. Cyclopean, the Great Abyss began life in 2024 as a roguelike made for a 3-day dungeon crawler themed game jam over on itch.io. That original version is still available for free and is fun in its own right, but the version we're concerned with today is considerably expanded. For starters, it's no longer a roguelike by default, though optionally on first boot you can choose to enable roguelike mode for a tougher challenge and greater replayability. On its standard settings though, it's designed for you to be able to save before potentially tricky moments and reload if everything goes catastrophically wrong. In Cyclopean, the Great Abyss, you take on the role of an old dreamer who's become trapped in the Great Abyss, the underworld that lies beneath the Dreamlands. Your eventual aim isn't actually made entirely clear at the outset of the game. One can, however, assume that your main goal is to escape the Abyss, but whether this means returning to the waking world or just going back to the Dreamlands is initially left deliberately vague. Unusually, the character creation process for Cyclopean the Great Abyss is kept deliberately hands-off. You're presented with a character with a randomised name, inspired by stodgy English upper-class gentlemen according to creator Michael Schmidt, and given their basic statistics in strength, skill and mind. You can choose to accept this character or re-roll for another completely randomised character. There's no means of assigning points yourself, you simply pick one that you like the look of. Some role-playing purists might balk at this, but it means you get into the game pretty quickly. And your starting stats don't really matter all that much in the long run. You get 5 points to upgrade them every time you level up, so you can either cover your weaknesses or buff up your strength quite considerably in relatively short order. Probably the more interesting thing to look at with your starting character is whether or not they have a pre-existing relationship with one of the species that inhabits the Abyss. If this is the case, you'll be able to ally yourself with any members of that species you find wandering around, if you have an instance of their favourite item, allowing you to assemble a party of companions to, let's face it, do all your fighting for you. Under normal circumstances, you have to find a book that relates to the species you're trying to woo, then meet the statistic requirements to read the book in order to unlock enough knowledge to propose an alliance, and you still need to ply them with their favourite items. To further complicate matters, the various species of the Abyss don't get along, so getting cosy with one might see others attacking you on sight, while others are fairly ambivalent about who you hang out with, so long as you don't try and force them together if they don't want to cooperate. Some are completely unwilling to accept you spending time with any species other than themselves, while others will form tentative alliances. We'll come back to companions in a bit. First, let's consider the overall flow of the game, which will be immediately familiar to anyone who has played the early Ultima or Questron games, which are cited inspirations for Schmidt's work. You start the game on the map screen that represents the overworld, well, underworld I guess, which is presented from a top-down perspective. From here you can wander around, explore, interact with the locals in both hostile and friendly manners, and perhaps find your way into a dungeon. In a dungeon, the action switches to first-person gridder style with full auto-mapping thankfully, and challenges you to explore all the dark crevices available to you, so long as your torch holds out. Much of your interaction with Cyclopean the Great Abyss involves encounters with other creatures. Upon starting an encounter, you have 3 options: combat, stealth, and dialogue. Combat is self-explanatory, it means you start a fight. In the tradition of the games that inspired it, fighting in Cyclopean the Great Abyss is uncomplicated. You can attack with whatever weapon you're wielding, if any. You can direct any one of your companions to attack. You can use an item. You can attempt to flee once per battle. Success returns you to the entrance of a dungeon or a campsite on the world map. But if you fail, your only other option for resolving a combat without defeating your enemy or dying is to yield to them, which usually results in a significant amount of your inventory items being taken. Stealth is an option when an encounter begins, assuming you were the one to initiate it, with the implication being that you spotted the enemy before they spotted you. Under the stealth heading, you can choose to ambush an enemy, which, if successful, rewards you with an automatic critical hit. To sneak, which hides you from the enemy for several turns, potentially allowing you to get past them without them noticing. To pilfer, which lets you steal their gold and items if successful. And to capture, which, if you have a suitable net and enough skill, allows you to take an enemy captive. Captured enemies can subsequently be sold to certain other creatures, or are sometimes a prerequisite for forming an alliance with certain species. Dialogue covers the peaceful approaches. Attempting to align with a creature you're on good terms with automatically offers them their favourite item if you have one, and causes them to join your party if you do. If you don't, you'll be told what their favourite item is, so you know what to look out for. If you don't have a pre-existing alliance with a particular species at the start of the game, you'll need to find and read their relevant book before you can pull this off. The maximum number of companions in your party is determined by your mind statistic, and companions level up independently of you. Also under dialogue is the trade option, which allows you to buy and sell with any creature that isn't trying to kill you. Each creature has its own inventory and pool of gold, though there are dedicated trader characters at various points around the underworld too. Only one of these is accessible at the start of the game, but you quickly learn rumours that there are several more in hiding. The trader is distinct in that they have a much larger selection of items and gold pool than regular wandering creatures, and their inventory also refreshes after a visit to a dungeon. So if you're looking for a particular item, exploring a bit and then coming back can sometimes be the answer. You can also inquire with friendly creatures, which allows you to ask about keywords you've discovered. These include species of creature you've encountered, important locations you've discovered, and key items you might have found or at least heard mentioned. Not all creatures will want to talk about everything. Being on good terms with a particular species will naturally make them somewhat more loquacious, but even then, few creatures will have kind or helpful things to say about their sworn enemies. Finally, you can ask a creature to let you pass. This quite simply allows you to pass by a tile they're currently occupying, letting you progress past them without feeling obliged to stab them to death first. Granted, that is always an option, but it's not always advisable, particularly if you're trying to make friends, or if you're face to face with a particularly strong creature that has up until now been tolerating your presence. Inside the dungeons, you have a few additional considerations. Firstly, and perhaps most importantly, you need light to find your way around most dungeons, which comes in the form of torches. Each torch lasts for around 1,000 turns, though you'll find they will almost certainly burn out early if you find yourself incapacitated but not dead during a dungeon delve. Dungeons are grid-based, but occasionally feature changes in elevation through steps, giving them a much better sense of being 3D than the classic dungeons of the original Ultima and Questron games. You'll also frequently stumble across locked doors which require various types of key to pass. You can also attempt to bash down a door or pick its lock with sufficient strength or skill statistics, and a lockpick in your possession in the latter case. Alternatively, keys can be found lying around as random treasure, in chests, or as tradable items with various creatures. As you explore a dungeon, you can search directly in front of you in an attempt to spot hidden traps, discover various items lying around, and uncover secret doors. There's no real penalty to searching every space as you move, though searching some spaces will result in you inadvertently finding unnamed and possibly non-existent horrors in the dark, which drains your wits statistic. Run out of wits, and you have a nervous breakdown, which usually, though not always, sees you fleeing blindly back to the entrance of the dungeon, or your camp if you're on the world map, burning out your torch if you're underground, and occasionally losing some of your allies. If you're particularly unlucky, your panicked flight will actually cause you to end up in a completely random location in a dungeon. With this in mind, wits is a statistic that it's almost as important to manage as your overall health. To draw analogues to the game Cyclopean the Great Abyss is paying homage to, it fulfills a similar function to the food mechanic in older world RPGs, effectively acting as a fatigue mechanic of sorts. If you want to survive the game's deepest dungeons, you'll need to find a way to manage your wits effectively. Thankfully, there are a few ways to accomplish this. While having otherworldly horrors in your party will generally drain your wits every few turns, and encountering particularly horrific enemies will also come with a strong hit to your mental well-being, you can recover wits by drinking cups of tea, finding treasure, and selling items. You'll also automatically fully replenish both your health and your wits every time you level up. You can set up camp outside a dungeon by buying or finding a tent item. Using this sets up a permanent campsite that you can return to at any point to rest up and fully recover your health and wits. The only exception to this is if you've been hit with a venomous attack which drains your maximum health and must be cured with a special and expensive medicine. Prior to this, resting will only allow you to recover up to the temporarily reduced maximum. Your campsite is also where you generally flee to when either escaping an enemy encounter or having a nervous breakdown. You will have almost certainly noticed Cyclopean the Great Abyss's distinct aesthetic by this point. The default green screen look is inspired by the Apple II computers Schmidt grew up with, and the option to completely desaturate the display is designed to resemble old Apple Macintosh games. You can also freely adjust the highlight colour, so if you have fond memories of playing on orange phosphor screens you can play that way, or you can simply customise the game's look as you see fit. Initially, the monochromatic nature of Cyclopean the Great Abyss might appear to be a little difficult to pass, particularly on the map screen. As you play though, it becomes very clear that this is a deliberate stylistic choice not just to pay homage to the classic computer hardware, but also to reflect the nature of the adventure you're on. The somewhat otherworldly look of dungeons in particular gives you the impression that you're perceiving the world with a mind that isn't entirely in full working order, and it also allows the enemies to be presented in somewhat vague terms. The thing with a lot of Lovecraftian horror is that many of the beasties involved are supposedly so terrifying that gazing upon them directly would cause your brain to immediately melt into a puddle of goo, meaning that presenting them in full detailed 2025 vision would not really be in the spirit of things. The interface, best driven with mouse and keyboard but workable with a gamepad, is a little clunky to navigate, but once again one gets the distinct impression that this is at least somewhat deliberate. This is a strictly turn-based game, and the nature of the interface allows you to take your time and consider each action carefully before committing to it. It also feels nicely authentic to the games that Cyclopean the Great Abyss is paying homage to, without going so far as to demand that you remember key commands for every key on your keyboard, or presenting everything using ASCII characters. Sound-wise, the game is mostly excellent, with atmospheric ambient effects and music used well throughout, coupled with very good spot effects. I will note, however, that opening and closing doors uses the same stock sound effects many of us will have last heard in AOL Instant Messenger, may it rest its digital soul. They're not bad sound effects in themselves, they just carry certain associations with those of us of a certain age. But given what else this game is doing with its aesthetics, perhaps that's fine. Cyclopean the Great Abyss is ruthlessly old school. In fact, in some respects it's even more brutal than the games it's paying tribute to. For example, in the first Ultima and Questron games, dying wouldn't mean the end of your game, you'd simply respawn somewhere else, albeit typically without most of the useful items you'd managed to accumulate, and with a pitiful amount of health and other resources needed to survive. In Cyclopean the Great Abyss, however, death means a hard game over, so I hope you remember to save, as there is absolutely no auto-saving here. Thankfully, a quick save function was added in during the last days of the game's early access period, and this makes it much less likely that you'll inadvertently end up losing hours of progress. This assumes you're not playing on the roguelike mode, of course, which doesn't allow mid-game saving for anything other than suspending a session, and which requires that you start over if you do happen to fall foul of some otherworldly horror. Cyclopean the Great Abyss is an excellent modern interpretation of the classic computer role-playing game. While it lacks some of the more accessible modernisations that Moonring offered, this also makes it feel even more authentic to the material it's paying homage to. Its basic mechanics are easy to pick up and understand, but there's considerable depth lurking beneath the surface as you attempt to build up your character, equip them properly, gather allies, and survive in the underworld. While scripted story elements are practically non-existent in Cyclopean the Great Abyss, the real strength of this type of game comes from the sense of emergent narrative you feel as you play. While you can scum your way around difficult encounters and challenges, in many respects it's a lot more fun and interesting to just accept any non-fatal consequences for things not quite going to plan and attempt to find a solution for yourself. Sometimes this involves getting a bit creative, sometimes it involves taking chances, Sometimes it involves cutting your losses and coming back to try again later when you're better equipped. In many respects, the real beauty of this game is in how it doesn't at any point tell you what you're supposed to be doing. If you want to win the game by escaping the abyss, you can of course do that. If you want to simply try and clear dungeons as efficiently as possible, you can do that. If you want to build your player character up into an invincible warrior, you can do that. And if you want to assemble an army of cats strong enough to defeat even the most maleficent of cosmic horrors, you can absolutely do that too. Okay, it's not exactly go anywhere, do anything by the very nature of its own inherent and deliberate limitations, but honestly, when has any game, particularly in the RPG genre, ever really lived up to that phrase? What we have here is an excellent homage to the early days of role-playing games, presented in a way that is highly accessible to everyone except those who really can't deal with the visual style. It's easy to learn, hard to master, an absolute delight to play, and clearly a passion project and labour of love for its creator. Plus, it's designed in such a way that it doesn't need to take over your entire life. You can probably beat it in 10 to 15 hours if you're determined, though you can also spend a lot longer with it too, particularly if you decide to challenge it in roguelike mode. If you have the slightest interest in anything I've said today, I encourage you to check out Cyclopean: The Great Abyss. Creators making the things that they want to make, particularly if those things are considered dead by the mainstream highly commercialised end of the industry, is something that should be celebrated. And as the big budget AAA end of things continues to implode day after day, it's these smaller scale passion projects that are really going to endure. At least they deserve to. So go on with you. A grand adventure in the Great Abyss awaits. Say hello to the Gugs for me. And on that note, it just remains for me to say, as always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you again next time.